Welcome back to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Rodney Ascher is an American documentary filmmaker, perhaps best known among us horror fans for Room 237, a documentary that focuses on the exhaustively diverse amount of theories surrounding The Shining. Rodney's other projects include The Nightmare, a terrifying deep dive into the world of sleep paralysis, and Primal Screen, which is about childhood fears of characters that fall into the uncanny valley, now streaming on Shudder. Rodney's latest movie, A Glitch in the Matrix, explores the widely reported phenomena of simulation theory, the terrifying idea that all of human life is a big simulation as portrayed in the Matrix. Guys, this movie is fantastic. All of Rodney's movies are really amazing. He's one of the most fascinating documentarians out there, so definitely check out his other films like Room 237 and The Nightmare, but run, don't walk to see A Glitch in the Matrix. It's extremely unique, fascinating, and as always, Rodney's directorial style is downright hypnotic. Also, if you're even remotely interested in this notion of simulation theory, I suggest checking out the Reddit thread, also titled A Glitch in the Matrix. If you really want to get freaked out by some first-hand accounts of this alleged phenomenon, check it out on Reddit. So this is my second interview with Rodney. And in my first, we get into his director origin story and more of his techniques and processes as a filmmaker. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out episode number 36. In this interview, Rodney and I focused almost exclusively on A Glitch in the Matrix. I always enjoy speaking to him. So here, without further ado, is master documentarian Rodney Ascher. Rodney Ascher, good to see you again. How's it going?
It's good. Great to see you, man.
You too. You too. So, I mean, I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. I've seen all your movies, very familiar with them. But I think Glitch in the Matrix might actually be my favorite so far. So, first of all, bravo. Really, really fantastic and just super different in so many ways. I mean, I'm always fascinated by the kind of ethereal sensibility of your movies where tonally, it is your movies are so different from so many documentaries, but the kind of ethereal nature of it feels like it's so thought out in a way. It's just so beautifully orchestrated. So, I mean, first of all, in terms of just finding the tone of your movies, I'm curious as to how you're able to orchestrate this just very different style of documentary filmmaking.
Yeah. Well, thanks, and I appreciate all that, and I'm glad that that mood works for you, because it is certainly something that we spend a lot of time trying to bring down for a landing, right? Mm-hmm. I'd say there may be a couple things about how that works, and I mean, the reason it's that way is mostly just a question of taste.
Yeah.
Right. That I always love music that casts sort of a hypnotic spell, whether it's through repetition or through tones that continue for a long time. I mean, I love to just sort of resynchronize my brainwaves to something I'm watching or listening and keep that connection without, breaking it to, get a snack from the fridge or check my phone. But,
mm-hmm.
If you can get that kind of connection where it almost feels like, people are breathing at the same time, if you know what I mean. And I experience that, when I'm watching things that I love or listening to music. I think, the way we try to pull that off, there's maybe two or three things about it. One of them is that we don't build the base of it, the audio track, the interviews on sound bites. We let people speak at great length. Mm-hmm. So there's, fewer people, I think, usually appear in my stuff than in a lot of other docs, maybe things that are closer to journalism. I see a real model for what we do in This American Life, mm-hmm. Where they'll have regular people telling long stories and both, things that usually have, very unusual, striking events that occur within them. But then there's also a period of reflection where they think about what this means to them and how it changed them. And that's something that, we do with the people that I interview in these pieces.
Yeah,
so,
the movie has these kind of ambient pauses where something significant has been said and it just kind of allows the viewer time to absorb it, which I think that it's brilliantly done. And they're integrated in a way where they feel just very natural, but it's just like there's so much information and so much of it was so mind-blowing, particularly in this movie, but you need those little pauses, but they flow so beautifully with the style of the movie and the music and everything. So I thought that was a really interesting choice.
Yeah, and you can't discount the power of the music, right? I've been working with Jonathan Snipe since 237, and I hope to work with him on every project I do for the rest of my life, because not only do I like sort of the vocabulary that he works with, the instruments that he uses, the style of music, but he also gets that mood, right? And often the mood is supposed to sort of reflect the kind of emotional quality of the storytellers, even, or maybe especially when it's at odds with what my reaction to something might be like, or what I imagine the audience is, that the audiences will. And the music goes along to that sort of hypnotic, repetitive, ethereal quality.
Yeah.
As well as a lot of the footage. I try to let shots play out so that we can just sort of soak in their atmosphere and live in them for a while. I mean, a pet peeve of mine, is a movie with unbelievable special effects or costumes or sets that rushes through before we get a chance to really see everything. And I just want to soak in it and fall under, and soak under the water of the spell of a movie, or even just a moment.
Yeah. Well, your collaboration with Snipe feels like he's the Danny Elfman to your Tim Burton in a way. And when it comes to these orchestrating these scenes, what is your process like working with him? Does he come up with a piece of music first? Do you tell him, here's the mood I'm going for? Is it something different? Like, what is that process like?
Well, it's a couple things, and it's evolved over the films. But I typically edit with music, starting with, stuff from my collection. Although in these later projects, he's both given me music from other people that he thinks might be in the appropriate style. As often as ever since 237, I immediately moved to reusing his old music in temps for the new stuff, because because I just love it so much, and it always matches the moods that we're going here through. I suppose that might make sense to somebody. There's another step of the process that I really love, which is called the spotting session, right? And what you do is, me and Jonathan sit in a room. This go round, we were doing it virtually, like I'm talking with you. We weren't able to be in the actual same physical room, but we watched the movie, and he has a recorder going, and we just talk about the mood as we step through it. And I don't have any kind of music education, and I have strong opinions about music I like and music I don't like, but I can't speak with it with any sort of specificity. I don't understand most musical vocabulary. So when I'm describing a moment, I have to try to, paint a picture, say something like, all right, this is a moment where our character is sinking into the quicksand, but right here now someone has thrown a rope to him. And we record that, and he syncs it up to the movie, and then he has that as a reference. And the music will, say, have some turning point that reflects that mood change at that moment. Yeah. And then as the two of us sort of talk through the movie, and at that point, a lot of his questions get answered, and then I get really excited as I hear about the ideas of how he's going to approach things. And of course, he doesn't just do the music; he's also the sound designer, and supervising the mix. So all the sound effects are coming from the same hands and are working with the same palette.
So it's fully integrated. Yeah, I mean, there's an ethereal sensibility to your movies that I don't think I've ever seen in any other documentaries, certainly before. So I mean, just it sounds like it's such a organic process when you guys work together. It must be really intensive and focus heavy to really just get it right.
Yeah, well, I mean, although in this one, I mean, because we've been working together for a while now, I think we probably, talked the least.
You got to be a shorthand.
and we understand, we each understand how the other works, and what's helpful, what's not helpful. um yeah not much more to say on that, but
Yeah.
he's able to often able to walk some really tricky lines emotionally in some sequences, and they elevate the power of the scene, by a power of 10.
Yeah. I feel like one of the common sort of pitfalls for a lot of documentaries is that they focus too much on talking heads, and a lot of people get bored of that. And you had a very unique solve in this movie. So, how did these kind of avatar people come about? Were you trying to hide their identity, or where did this idea come from? Because it was so cool.
One of them wanted to be anonymous, but for the others, they were just happy to go where I wanted to take it. And that was an idea that I had really early on, that we wouldn't see the faces of the primary people talking, but instead we would see some sort of animated avatar. And we went through a couple of different ideas with it, but where we landed, and what I think works pretty well, is that there's sort of video game-esque characters, who maybe look like they may be from some kind of half-forgotten comic book series or old science fiction movie, who appear within these Skype calls that I did with the original people, and we keep the natural background behind them, whatever arbitrary place they happened to do the recording from, and it gives you this amazing sense of there's a blurring of fantasy and reality, where we've got these unreal characters in a very real, mundane, human location, and they're also speaking very informally, and it allows us to also use those characters in the animated reenactments, so it's exactly the same person, and not what an actor who looks kind of like the person that you interviewed.
Right.
And there's so much talk in this movie using, video games as a metaphor for life. The fact that, in a way, I think these interviews looked like talking to a video game character on their day off. It feels on message, for the project.
Yeah, it seemed to work, beautifully well with the subject of the documentary. And one thing I remember from our last interview was that when it comes to these topics, you seem to and you even, I believe you said something along the lines of you're not trying to be a journalist. You're trying to focus more on people's experience with these things and people's perception of these topics, like with Nightmare and particularly with this. So what was the research process like, considering that you were less focused on the technical side, although it did get into some technical histories, and the Philip K. Dick being a through line throughout the movie, I thought just was fascinating. But what was the research process like, in the context of you wanting to ensure that this was mostly focused on people's individualized perceptions of this notion of a simulation theory?
Well, it was twofold, right? In the characters, the subjects sort of fall into two categories mostly. That there are, the people who, when we call them eyewitnesses, who have gone through something in their life, on the other end of it, have come to believe in simulation theory. And then there's sort of a handful of experts who have interesting perspectives on it, whether they're talking about philosophy, or an expert on Philip K. Dick, or they've thought a lot about like Plato's cave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those folks came from, as I did the research before I did the movie, I kind of came up with sort of 100 important things about simulation theory, many of which I would hope they would get in the film. Clearly not all of them would be able to fit. So when we talk about Plato's cave, which is an important precursor, philosophically, the notion that, these prisoners who saw shadows on the wall projected from a flame behind them would think that those shadows are reality, until one is freed and he has to sort of reconcile his memory of the shadowy figures with what's out there in the real world.
Right.
And how most of us, in some way or another, are only looking at shadows, don't get a one-to-one encounter with everything in the real world. And at a certain point in this project, I found a link to Emily Pottis's article and reflection on Plato's cave. And she had a great way of sort of looking at it in contrast with people's media environments, and how different people who soak in different media environments build up different reconstructions of the world in their heads. And so she was quickly somebody that I wanted to talk to shine a light, to shine a light on that idea. And then, interestingly enough, nobody fits in only one box. So she had a lot to say about other related issues. So that's a different kind of category than the four guys, who each went through their own personal journeys. And those folks we didn't find; they found us.
Really?
We announced that we were doing the movie.
Okay.
And we set up a place online where folks could reach us, and then, I don't know, 100 or so people sent us their stories. And from those, we have, those are the four that, made it into the final cut. Because, there'd have been no way for us to find them. These are people who are just living their lives, wrestling with this idea in private. That we needed to create an opportunity for someone who really wanted to share that experience and share those ideas to find us.
Yeah. Well, there was one person whose experience was extremely tragic and extremely terrifying. Did you converse with that person? Was that somebody that you were able to interview?
Oh yeah. That, Josh Cook, you mean? Yeah. Well, that was a phone call. That was the one that we weren't able to do that one on person, and we weren't able to set up a Skype. But in the research in my research on simulation theory, I came across the idea of the matrix defense, and that more than one person has used the fact that they thought they were living in a digital simulation as part of their criminal defense. So, we try to find someone who could speak to that, and Josh Cook, is, lived it.
Yeah, of course. So when it came to all of the different subjects and topics and it's a very emotionally loaded concept, the idea of simulation theory. I'm sure as a director, you had to be relatively journalistic about all of this and objective, even though your movies are not as journalistic and they're more cerebral and they're more focused on individual experiences. But was there, in your research or in these conversations, did you ever have anything close to an existential crisis when it comes to, processing this idea of simulation theory? Was there anything that got a little too either scary or, did this jar you or jolt you in any way?
I found, I think the aspects of the film that some people might found troubling, I found troubling too, but never in a way that came close to knocking me out of commission.
Yeah.
It would probably be a better story if it if I had to check into a hotel in a tropical island to recover from the existential horror that I uncovered in my journey. But this was a day job. I'd go to the office and I would listen to these troubling stories, and then I would come home and eat dinner and play with my kid and watch TV and fall asleep early. With the lights still on.
Yeah.
On the couch.
Well, of all the very fascinating concepts in the movie, the Mandela Theory blew my mind. There were some details in there that I couldn't believe. Like when they showed this, I think it was Snow White or Sleeping Beauty. I think it was Snow White. There was a lot of moments where you just kind of go, what? There was a lot of that. Were there any concepts that hit the cutting room floor that were really hard for you to pull from the movie because they were either fascinating or interesting?
Yeah, there were a bunch, right? Let me see. There's one. One of them, which was, even, more existentially horrifying than many of the others, was the idea that the simulation was that everybody in the simulation is one person, the same person.
Whoa!
And in fact, that person is the sort of supernatural creator of the simulation,
like a god,
who is like a god, like an immortal omnipotent God who, faced with infinity alone, created the world and then played every part one at a time, reincarnating through time and space across the planet as a way of killing a couple million years.
Whoa. That sounds rooted in Hinduism. And I know you got into like Hindu gods and incarnations within incarnations and things like that. But yeah, that's pretty wild. Yeah, one thing that was kind of crazy is the guy who you profiled who did the sensory deprivation tank. I was in that same tank and I talked to that same dude.
That same guy?
That same guy. I've done a sensory deprivation experience once. I highly recommend it to anybody. It's fantastic. But I just happened to do it at that same dude's apartment.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that
really
is a
nice guy.
Coincidence.
What's that?
Yeah, he looks. Well, I mean, we reached out to get permission to use his picture. He's like, "Oh, sure, whatever you need. I've got others if you need them."
Yeah.
I went into a tank myself, in preparation for dramatizing that scene.
Oh, nice. What was your experience like?
I wished it would have been more psychedelic, right? But there was a new place that opened up that was like the vibe of it was it's a chain, and the vibe of it was very similar to like a Massage Envy kind of a spa.
That's what I felt too. Yeah, I was looking for them in New York because I live in the city, and I was looking for a sensory deprivation tank, and the rest of them felt like tanning salons or like Massage
that was
Envy.
Kind of the vibe of it.
And this dude's place, that's why I chose it, because I called him on the phone, and he was very engaging. He was like, "I talked to you before, then I talked to you after about your experience," and just like, "All right, this sounds great. Sounds like exactly what I want."
Well, what happened to you? Anything? And did you see anything?
No, I can't say I saw anything, but it was extremely clarifying. It just there was this, because I meditate. I do transcendental meditation, which is I think it enables it's like a cognitive superpower. It makes you not immune to irrationality or irrational thoughts, but it helps you defend against them way better. You just become aware of your own mind, and you're way less triggered or jarred by things, and you don't self-sabotage as much. So I went in with a little bit of a sense of calm, but just getting rid of all of that input all the time and all of those racing thoughts for an hour and a half, I just came out very clear. And all I wanted to do was reabsorb stuff. I just wanted to go home and read and watch movies, and I felt like I'd kind of emptied the tank, my own brain, for a while. So yeah, I didn't have any kind of, there were some sort of there was like a sensibility of being disembodied from my body, and like that a little bit. There was a sense of being just like in the primordial source a little. So there was like maybe a few moments that were a little bit spiritual, but there's nothing super psychedelic. But it was just, it was very calming and clarifying. And I feel like you got to do it a bunch of times to really get the effects. I want to do it more. I want to try doing it more, but yeah, I've only done it once, but I'll probably jump back into one at some point.
Yeah. I wished, I don't think I even got that from it, that I was in the dark and I was, just conscious of my breathing. But I mean, maybe because I spend so much time alone when I'm working on these sorts of projects, that I can sit in my head and not say anything and just follow a train of thought for. So I was just always in my head, and I hardly ever even, sort of forgot that I was in the tank. I was hoping to sort of go someplace.
Yeah.
The one thing that, I was trying also to be very conscious of anything that I might want to include within the reenactment. And I remembered that that Leo said that he could hear even his eyelashes.
Yeah. Did you hear that?
I did. I paid attention. I did. And I tried to really pay attention to it, and it was like a.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah, because I mean, this place, didn't necessarily have the most, fascinating atmosphere, but
right.
It was the tank was, was serious, and it was large, and it was warm, and it was pitch black. But I always felt safe that there was like a panic button not too far away.
Oh, that's good.
I had trouble getting out of my head, and I've tried. a lot of people that I admire are really into TM.
Mhm.
So I sort of just tried to do it on my own, and I've never had any luck. I either stay stuck in my head or just fall asleep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I did. A lot of people I admire do too, like, Seinfeld, David Lynch.
Andy Kaufman was big into
Andy Kaufman did it? I didn't know that.
Oh my God. Yeah, he was he was very, very deep into it.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I went to the David Lynch Foundation in New York, and that's where they taught me.
Neat.
Yeah. It's good to have a teacher, though, for sure. If you ever want to give it another shot, I'd recommend getting a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But so the topics of your documentaries are always really, really fascinating. How do you decide on, I'm going to pursue this? I'm sure you have tons of ideas on a regular basis. Is there any sort of litmus test that you put yourself through to decide, okay, I'm going to pursue this?
I think the biggest question for me is whether I stay interested, for more than, a couple days at a time.
Yeah.
Right. Like in the case of all three of these subjects, there are things that I just never, once I started thinking about them, I never let go. I could never stop talking about them. Remember, tossing 237 around with Tim Kirk, that the two of us would talk about not only The Shining, but the whole idea of, interpreting every little detail in a piece of art, probably for 2 years before we embarked on the film. And, sleep paralysis and simulation theory have been sort of the same.
Yeah.
And the other thing I like about them is they're big mysteries, but I don't feel an obligation to solve them because they're bigger than I am. Right. I'm not going to be the guy who can prove definitively or debunk simulation theory.
Yeah.
And with sleep paralysis, I'm not the guy who's going to be able to prove that this is giving us access to the supernatural or that it's just a dream.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm happy to leave these mysteries as unsolvable for now.
Yeah, and that's something I really love about your movies is there's no agenda to prove or disprove anything, and it gives the movie this sense of flow and kind of, I don't know how to put it. It just allows the movie to be the movie and to be this very natural sort of thing, instead of you being so tied up with having an agenda. Well, I showed this side, now I have to show the antithesis of the side to be even.
And then I come to the conclusion. Yeah,
right.
I don't have a horse in the race whether simulation theory is real or not.
Yeah,
or any of these things. So I'm happy to reflect, the ideas and the struggles of people who thought about it more than I have, and many of whom have had firsthand experience.
Yeah.
And just try to put the audience into their heads.
Yeah.
And let them look at the world or look at these subjects through their eyes.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I think that's what makes your movies as interesting as they are, because they're just agenda free. We seem to be documentaries seem to be having a real heyday. There's a lot of them now, and they're coming out left and right. And I feel like with more and more documentaries coming out, this sort of templated documentary style is going to go by the wayside. And I feel like we're going to have to see more documentaries like yours that are refreshingly structurally different, and that just give viewers a different kind of cinematic experience with a documentary. But having said that, are there any recent documentaries you've seen that you found to be just refreshingly different in the way that they tell the story? And I know you've been working hard on this doc, so I'm sure you have not had a lot of time to see many, but is there anything that comes to mind in the past few years that's recent and exciting in the documentary space?
Yeah, there's one that I loved, Penny Lane's The Pain of Others.
Oh, I've heard of that. I didn't see that one.
And that one's amazing. What she did is, I had never heard of it, but there's this thing called Morgellons syndrome, Morgellons disease, which is like this kind of skin, itchy, painful kind of condition. And, what's interesting about it, among other things, is that, Western medicine isn't 100% sure whether it's real or psychosomatic.
Okay.
And 95% of this movie is nothing but YouTube videos of people documenting their symptoms, their fight with it, their progression, and some of it gets very, very, very troubling.
Yeah.
But, I just loved, the rawness of, of these naked webcams and these people who were, confessing their stories online. And if you think some of the stories in this movie are personal, that one goes 10 times further. And it's also, to me, really provocative about, as a there are many kinds of films that I love as an audience, and one of them is a collage film. Making a movie from pre-existing elements, and the fact that most of this was made by collecting, stuff off of YouTube. Is very, very, very new and different and personal, and allowed her to compile, I think some of these confessions probably went, over the span of, a couple of years. So that one really blew me away. I was a gigantic fan of Brett Morgen's Jane.
Okay. I got to see that one.
Oh my gosh. And that's another one, like, it is not just a piece of journalism. It is sound and picture, and it is a rock opera.
Oh wow!
Where you learn where it's the meaning of life via Jane Goodall's experiences with the apes.
Okay. That's the one where they have found all of that archival footage that nobody had seen before, that they just recovered.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly archival too, though there's a contemporary interview that he did with her. And that footage is exquisite, and it's sort of like, if you've ever, kind of got into like going to a used bookstore and just sort of loving like the colors of old National Geographic magazine covers.
Yeah.
That's sort of like Ektachrome slide film, that color process, like it sort of takes the aesthetics of a National Geographic cover from the 70s.
Oh, that's cool.
And pushes it, pushes it to 11 with a new Philip Glass score, that's just cut in a way that is, beyond what you'd see, behind a band, like at a metal concert.
Oh, wow.
It turns into a whole kaleidoscope, projected huge and blast the soundtrack.
That sounds insane. Yeah, it's on Netflix, I think. I think Netflix did it.
Or it might be, I think it's on Disney Plus because it's Nat Geo.
Oh, really? I don't know why I thought I saw a Jane Goodall documentary on...
There's probably more than one.
Yeah,
this one's called Jane,
Okay.
It's, Brett Morgen, he did the Kurt Cobain one.
Yep.
And The Kid Stays in the Picture.
Which I loved.
His stuff is always amazing.
Okay, cool. All right, I will definitely check those out. So the visuals in Glitch in the Matrix were so much fun and so cool and so interesting. There's a particularly fascinating sequence at the end that kind of fly through the house towards the end of the movie. Could you tell us about just the overall visuals? What was your approach and how you got some of these pieces of footage? But I also do want to drill down into that last sequence because it was really cool.
Yeah. Well, there's 3 or 4 buckets that the animation comes in, right? I worked with like Sid Guerin at Mindbomb and Lorenzo Fonda and Davey Force. And do you remember a short from a couple of years ago, The Chickening, where The Shining was remixed into this sort of completely absurd Adult Swim-esque fried chicken commercial?
No. Sounds amazing though.
No, yeah, it's so surreal, and it's so colorful. It almost looks like a Wacky Packs kind of come to life.
Whoa.
Like this acid drenched Easter egg color photoreal animation. Anyway, that was Davey Force, and I'm forgetting his partner's name, but Davey did the animation of like the guy in the movie theater in the spaceship at the end that had a sort of a more of a photoreal look.
Right.
Lorenzo did the avatars, and he would actually wear a rubber kind of motion capture suit to get their movements to be sort of natural.
Oh, that's cool.
But that moment where we're kind of flying through the house was something that, again, that was something that came together, in the last, sort of big push to finish the film, where to retrace his steps, what we did is we found a house that had a layout kind of like the one in the story. Actually, two, because there's a basement involved, and the first house that had the bedrooms and the kitchen and things didn't have a basement, so we kind of stitched these together, and we brought in this photogrammetry expert, who's a guy who, what they do is you take two machines, right, on a tripod. One of them shoots lasers. You put it in the middle of the room, and it shoots lasers in every direction, and it takes measurement of where everything is in space. And then he marches through with like 3 still cameras that are on different angles that take pictures of every detail in a room, and he'll like move both of them around on sort of a grid. Then afterwards, you take the photographs and you apply them like wallpaper onto the digital wireframe model of the room.
Wow.
And it looks photoreal until you get too close to anything.
Right.
And especially you see pixels, and you see like especially if you get to like some off corner, you know, like under a table or behind a lamp, that it sort of guesses the geometry and things kind of blend into each other, and you know, lamps sort of grow and melt into the table. So we did that for all the rooms that we were moving through in the house, and then Lorenzo and his partner Tommaso would sort of float a camera through it and move the lighting through. So it felt like we were kind of revisiting memories, because at one point, at first look, it's very realistic, but it's degraded
right
on the edges. And there were things we did with like the posters that we needed to obscure for copyright reasons, but it gave us a great opportunity to kind of digitally smear them.
Yeah, that was
and they would kind of wiggle a little bit. And, you know, I think the feeling we were trying to evoke was sort of reliving an old memory, but after having done it like 100 times, that it begins to kind of degrade around the edges, which coincidentally, or maybe not, you know, is something that Philip K. Dick talked about a lot, especially in Ubik, where the world was just sort of melting together and degrading and falling apart.
Yeah.
So that was that was a sequence. I was astonished at how well they were. The guys were able to pull that together, and you know, the sort of distinctive look of it. I'm not sure that. I think I'd like to think that we pushed that technology forward a little bit, that it hadn't been used in quite that way before.
Yeah, it's mostly used for video games and particularly virtual reality, I believe. Photogrammetry is, and I think that real estate
and for real estate, absolutely, yeah. That's a way to click around through rooms, but not to not to set a blow by blow cinematic recreation inside of it.
Well, it looked unbelievable. Really cool. So, what is next for you?
I've got 4, you know, kind of plates in the air. 2 of them are scripted, and 2 of them are documentaries.
Oh wow!
Although, you know, the scripted ones have elements that will not be completely unfamiliar to people who've seen the docs. But you know, in any case, I mean, all of them are going to be places where I get to, you know, get, knock on wood, you know, even more ambitious with, you know, the visual storytelling, which is always one of the fun parts of these projects.
Interesting. Well, I can't wait. So the movie comes out next week, right?
Yeah, well, it premieres at Sundance on Saturday, the 30th. And then February 5th, it goes on demand.
Great. And people can find it just on their normal on-demand channels.
Amazon, iTunes, or they call it the virtual cinema, where you can, you know, go to like the website of your neighborhood theater and, you know, let them take the percentage instead of Jeff Bezos or Tim Apple.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Rodney, real pleasure talking to you as always. This was such a fantastic movie, and thank you again for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Well, great to talk to you, Nick. I appreciate all that.
All right. Thank you guys, as always, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with your friends and family on social media? Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at I'm Nick Taylor. That's I am Nick Taylor. And on Twitter at the same handle. Thanks again for listening to the Nick Taylor Horror Show.